Hey everyone, welcome to my first of only one video on this, the Purma Special, one of only two cameras made by the Purma Camera Company. This is a 127 viewfinder camera. What that means is it uses 127 film. This is a 127 paper backing. It's very similar to 120 film, but it's a hair smaller. So this is 120, this is 127. This is what this camera uses. Viewfinder means that you look through the back of the camera here in this window, you sight up your scene, and approximately what's in this scene is what's going to be in focus. Everything in front of this camera from 1 meter, I think it is, 12, maybe a little bit further than that, to infinity is in focus. This is not, there were, oh yeah, I have that written down later, we'll get to that. Okay. The way that this works, there's no light meter on it. It has what's called a gravity armed shutter. So it has a guillotine type shutter, and the speeds on it are controlled by which direction the camera is held when the shutter is armed and then triggered. And there is a weight system in here that's really fascinating from a mechanical engineering perspective that helps govern that. The shutter speeds are 1/25th of a second, 1/150th of a second, that's the default shutter speed, and 1/450th of a second. There's no flash sync on this camera because there's no bulb mode, and at no time in any of the shutter speed settings is the entire film plane open to light. So there is, even if you were absolutely perfect at your timing and triggered the flash right at the middle of the exposure or something like that, not even on the slowest shutter speed, the entire film plane isn't exposed to light at the same time. So this was also, and has an interesting place in history because it was one of the first cameras to use a plastic body. I don't think it was the first, but it was an early example of this. And this is Bakelite, not plastic as we think of it today. But it was also the first camera to use a clear plastic lens. And so that's kind of neat. Now, the name Purma comes from the founders, Tom Purvis and Alfred Mayo. And if you are interested in learning more about how the shutter works, check out the Mike Ekman link in the video's description. He's got diagrams and graphics that show how it works, but basically the guillotine shutter on this, when you trigger it, it moves across the film like that. The default spacing between the two shutter leaves is 1/8 of an inch. And at the speed that they travel, when you have this in the neutral position, you're looking through the back of it and just holding it, that gap is 1/8 of an inch, and that's 1/150th of a second as that moves across the opening. When you tilt it in the direction of the fast shutter speed, that gap closes down to a 1/16th of an inch, and now you have a 1/450th of a second shutter speed. When you tilt it in the other direction to the slow shutter speed, now that gap becomes 1/2 of an inch, and now you have a 1/125th of a second shutter speed. The guillotine curtains always move at the exact same speed. The speed that this gives you, one of those three speeds, is based on the gap between them, and that's determined by the way that the weighting mechanism in here opens and closes the guillotine leaves. Really, from a mechanical engineering standpoint, an absolutely fascinating design approach to a shutter mechanism. The target market for the Purma Special would have been entry-level shooters, kids. And in England, where this was made, it would have been, at that time, the Brotherhood of British Scouts. And kids like that would have been using these for like their photography awards. Like in the US, we had Boy Scouts of America when I was in BSA. It's got a different name now, I think Scouting America, which is fine. I have no issue with that, by the way. But when I was in Boy Scouts, there was the Photography Merit Badge, and honestly can't remember whether or not that was one that I earned. But we would use entry-level cameras for that type of thing. Anyway, it's Bakelite plastic with a plastic viewfinder lens. It's simple. It is fun to use because holding it in different directions gives you different shutter speeds. It honestly, like, I did take this out and shoot it for the first time the other day, and it is kind of fun. It uses 127 film, but it delivers square format 3x3 images, which I'll open up the back here and show you what that looks like. It doesn't matter which way you hold the camera because it's always going to give you a square format image, okay? It's not perhaps the single most efficient use of film space, but it's, it was an entry-level camera meant for people to have fun with and kids to play with and stuff. One other thing about this, you can take a staggering 16 photos on this camera, because what you do, and we'll show you this when I load film, but if you put the first frame counter there, and then here you're getting basically half frame images, half frame image width on it. So you can put 16 3x3 cameras, images on here rather, which is, by the way, a perfect size for like a slide in a slide projector. Also, you could make the most of your film costs because you're getting double what that's the width of a 127 half frame image. The lens on this is a Beck Anastigmat f6.3, and it's with a 2.25 inch focal distance. At the time that this came out, this would have been a mid-low tier lens that was made by a mid-high tier maker. That's what I have in my notes. I don't exactly remember what I meant by that. I know that Beck made some decent lenses, and they did also make lenses for the Air Ministry during World War II, but this lens itself, not high-end. Also, there is a lens cap. Apparently many of these cameras have lost them over the years, but with the lens cap on, this is also a shutter lock, so when the lens is pushed back into the camera, the shutter can't accidentally be pressed. There we go. It has to go all the way back, but then that's your shutter lock's mechanism. This was made by Purma Cameras, and it was distributed by RF Hunter in the UK. They were made in Aberdare, Wales, and they were made from 1936 until 1951, with the exception that they were not made during World War II. It was not preceded by anything. This was the first camera that Purma ever made, and it was one of only two. The other camera that Purma made followed this one. It was called the Purma Plus, and it was arrived in 1951, and it was made until 1959, and that's when Purma shut their doors. I do have some tips that I'm going to give you for using this camera before we start jumping into the operation. The first thing is this Bakelite body. Bakelite's not like my favorite material to touch, I won't lie. It always feels super slippery and not quite greasy, but weird to me. This texture specifically really feels like that. So it is very slippery to hold. So I would suggest grabbing some masking tape, or frog tape is a little bit easier to remove, and putting some tape where you would hold the camera just to make it a little bit more comfortable to hold, so that it's also a little bit harder to drop it. This will shatter if you drop it, I'm sure. The other thing is the back of this is kind of prone to popping open. The clips aren't perfect on it, so I don't know if that's just mine, but I would assume that's more than just mine. So it's a good idea to tape around the sides of it as well, so that the back doesn't pop off. You do need to leave the red windows accessible to read. This camera is not recommended for C41 or slide film at all. In fact, even when it was made, it wasn't recommended for that. The red windows on this were meant for orthochromatic black and white film. If you're using panchromatic black and white film, which is literally everything except Ilford Ortho and a couple of other ortho stocks, there were green inserts that would be put on top of the red windows here. You could still read the numbers on your panchro black and white film, color film, and slide film, but you would get less fogging. With C41 and slide film today, you will almost certainly still get red fogging around the perimeter of the images from light coming in through the windows. You can also prevent that today if you want with some frog tape, because it's green and you can easily peel it back to read the numbers as you advance the film, or putting some masking tape or gaffer's tape on the back will help with that as well. The focus point on this is 12 feet to infinity. That's the number I think I was looking for earlier. So when you point this at something, everything from 12 feet in front of the camera to infinity will be in focus. That said, when this was made, there were 3 close focus auxiliary lenses you could pop onto this or screw onto it somehow. And those gave you a close-up photo of 18 inches. So you could just measure 18 inches in front of the camera, and that's where your focus point would be. There was also a close portrait attachment that gave you 3.5 feet to 5.5 feet of distance in front of the camera being in focus. And then there was a far portrait attachment, which was 5 feet to 7.5 feet in front of the camera, was in focus. And then later, apparently after World War II, Purma released a 24-inch close focus lens where, like the 18-incher, you just measured out 2 feet and whatever was 2 feet in front of the lens was in focus. The other available accessories also included a lens hood, a yellow contrast enhancing filter, a blue portrait filter, and a green filter, whatever green was for. So, at any rate, that's basically my tips. And let's start going over the camera's features and talking about what everything on the camera is. So we're going to start here on the top, and there's not a whole lot to see, but here's the shutter release button. Here is the film advance, and you might not be able to hear it. But as you advance, this has a little backward prevention mechanism in it, so you can't accidentally have the film pull itself back from the take-up spool. That's the shutter arming lever, which you can see disarms when you take the photo. The front of the camera only has a couple of things: make and model, made in England, viewfinder window. This is your lens, and this is your lens cap thread. The back of the camera has even less: viewfinder window, first frame count window, second frame count window. The bottom of the camera has zilch. Inside of the camera, we're going to open it up from the side with the film rewind knob here. We have a few things. This is your film placement area. This is where in like a minute I'm going to show you how to load film. This is your shutter area. This is your film take-up spool. On the back of the camera, which closes like this, we can see a film pressure plate of sorts. covers most of the shutter area. Honestly, that's probably just fine for what this camera's meant for. And you can see the inside of the red windows there. So while we have the Purma Special open, let's talk about how to load film. Here's where you're going to put your 127 spool that you're going to spool your film onto. Okay, so this is your empty spool. This is your new spool of 127 film, and it just clips right in. There's a couple of tracks here and here that what you do is you slide it into that spring, and under the spring and the nubs on the ends of the spool go right into those tracks. Pull out a leader, feed the leader into the take-up spool here, start advancing, guide the leader in so that it's nice and centered as it gets taken up. And 127 film, just like 120 film, has little arrows to indicate a start point. Start point's kind of arbitrary on this camera, but using the viewfinder window is a good place to use that. Now, the way that this has identical clips on each side, which is really confusing, but there is a guide on it that indicates film with a directional arrow. So we know that the way this is mounted is the way that the film follows the directional arrow, which would be this way. Okay, and now, next thing we're going to do is just keep advancing. And we're going to look in that red window to start seeing arrows. We're getting close. Next thing we should see is like the Kodak Ektachrome or Ektar, I think it'll say. Yeah, Kodak. One. Oh, went a little bit too far. We're going to overshoot that, and I'll show you. There we go. There you can see the number 1, okay? When you see that number 1, that means that you're on your first frame. It should be over here first. I just overshot it. Okay, so you see the number 1, you take your photo, and then to advance to the next frame, you advance until the number 1 is here, and that's when you take your second photo. After you take your second photo, you advance until the number 2, there we go, is in this first window, and then you advance until the number 2 is in this second window. Just like that, okay? And that's how you advance the film through this camera and get 16 frames onto a single roll of 127, because 3 centimeters is the half frame width of 127 photos. So I'm going to show you how the film goes through your camera. If you have this camera, you're probably an enthusiast and fairly familiar with cameras, so you don't need me to tell you not to open your film back, because this will ruin all of your films, all of your photos if you do. But basically the way that 127 film works is this spring here holds the paper in place. And then as you advance the film, you can see the numbers on the back here. Just move through the camera each time you take a photo. Photo 4, actually I guess it'd be photo 7, now photo 8, photo 9, now photo 10. So that's how the film works. All the way up through, the count goes up to 8 on 127 film. There you go. And then when you get to the 8, after your 16th photo, you're done taking photos, and you just fully advance your film, just like that. At that point, you can open up your camera, and to remove the film, you simply grab the leader and lift it out from the bottom, and kind of work it out from the top like that, and that will help you with removing your film. To reload your film, so basically the way that this works is, let me show you. Inside the camera, there's this brass dude right here, okay? And it's got a little, like, notch in the middle of it. So I'm going to set that notch to vertical, and the goal is to get the forks from the film spool into that notch. Slide it into the receiver, and there we go. This pops out just a little bit. Okay, that makes it a bit easier. And as that gets settled in, there we go. Actually, that's good now. This is now your take-up spool, okay? And you know it's going to work if you can turn this, and it's going to spin. The tolerances on it are really tight. It does not like the all-plastic 127 spools. It does like the metal ones. So just, a little bit fiddly on that in that regard. Oh, goodness. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the lens next. To get the lens ready, you simply remove the lens hood, and this will spring out by itself. The markings on it are Beck, who made it. Anastigmat is the type of lens. It's an anastigmatic lens, which is a multi-element lens. The aperture rather is f6.3. It's fixed at f6.3, and the focal length is 2¼ inches. So everything will be in focus, and it's set at a fixed focus so that everything from 12 inches to infinity will be in focus. I guess in theory, if you had the close-up lenses, you could figure out what different lengths here would give you different focus points. I guess you could put like the portrait lens on here and push it back a little bit and maybe focus on just infinity or something like that. That would be an interesting thing to play around with, but it would take some time. You'd have to, it'd be a lot of time and effort to figure that out. So at any rate, just a thought that occurred to me right now. But this is what the lens is telling you. The lens spins quite freely. But it doesn't do anything if you spin it. It just literally, it's which way do you want to have it oriented? Do you want it text up or text down? Next thing we're going to talk about with the camera is how to take a photo with it. And basically, the way that you're going to take a photo with it is you're going to load up your film. Okay, so let's assume you're using 100 ISO film. That's like the most common 127 film you can get right now. You definitely cannot use anything faster than that with this camera. f6.3 in full sun with 100 ISO film. Even at 1/150th of a second, you're still going to get very overexposed images. At 1/450th, they'll be suitably exposed. So to take a photo, you simply decide what shutter speed you want. Holding it flat like this is 1/150th of a second. Arm the shutter, take a photo. Okay, but let's say that I want to take a slow exposure. It's getting on toward evening, and I need 1/125th of a second. This side goes down. If you put the film winder down and arm the shutter, you might have been able to hear that was much slower. Let me show you so you can see the knob, okay? Because this moves at a different speed for different shutter times. You can see that was much slower, but it's full sun. There's no cloud cover. Even with 100 ISO film, you need something faster. I'm going to arm the shutter. And you could see how much faster that was. You could hear the difference. That's the 1/450th. So this side goes up for 1/450th of a second. Now, if you look on the back, there's also a little guide here. Fast points that direction. Slow points that direction. So fast means this side up. Slow means this side up. So you've got that reminder next to the viewfinder there for you. Okay, so super simple. That's great. What about double exposures? Double exposures are really easy. You're going to have no exposure control. Your images are going to be way thick and dark, but you can use the different shutter speeds. So you could do one double exposure at the very slow speed and one at the very fast. And if you're in the same lighting, then you could use the different shutter speeds, the medium as well, to get different amounts of exposure for each of your exposures on your double exposure photo. There's actually a whole lot of creativity that you could do in that vein with double exposures. With double exposures, it's super simple because this mechanism here for advancing the film has no connection to the shutter mechanism. So if you forget to advance the film, you're going to take a double exposure whether you want to or not. If you advance the film too far, you're going to take no exposures on your film whether you want to or not. So you've got to use the numbers in the back to advance, and you can take as many photos onto a single frame as you would like, and the camera will just keep doing it all day long, whether you advance the film or not. And with that, we've covered basically everything. Actually, we've covered exactly everything there is to cover with the Purma Special. And I guess the last thing I would leave you with is to remember that even though, yes, this is an old camera, it's starting to get fragile. You know, don't drop it. Don't store it badly. Don't leave it in your car. The heat will be catastrophic for this material. And just remember that your Purma Special is a precision tool that should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you in whatever videos come next.